Dr. Rooney, that's hilarious. Thank you, though. I'm very, very honored to be here. For the parents, the faculty, the board of directors and trustees, Dr. Wade, but most importantly, you, the students. This isn't going to be your typical commencement speech, and I'll tell you why. I got a few diplomas along the way in college, grad school, law school. I can honestly tell you I have no idea who the speaker was at any of them. All I remember from my college graduation was that the gym was hot. My grandparents were there, and they were still alive, and where we were going to dinner that night and who I was hanging out with later that night. That's all I could think about. So the faster the person speaking at the podium, the better. But, go ahead. I just want to say a few things that I think may help you along the way. You don't have to remember who I am or what, my title was or any of that. But there's a couple things that I've learned since I was in your seat that maybe will help you as you move through your careers. First and foremost, a couple things of pride. We heard the great rendition of our national anthem. Real quickly, a lot of us sing that song at baseball games, commencements, wherever, and we don't really listen to what the words are saying, and we don't even really know what it means. If you listen to it or you watch on the Jumbotron at a baseball game or football game, you'll see that most of the sentences end with a question mark. And why is that? What is that song about? Why is it relevant to you? The song is about prisoners in a ship hold off the coast or in the Bay of Baltimore, off where Fort McHenry sat. And Francis Scott Key, the guy that wrote the national anthem, was commissioned by the U.S. Army to go out and do a prisoner exchange with the British. So he got out there to this boat and he told the admiral, I'm here to do a prisoner exchange with the men that you have down below. They're Americans, we'll give you British, and then we'll go on continuing with the war. And the admiral said, you won't have to worry about continuing with the war because after tonight, this war is over. We're about to unleash hell upon Fort McHenry, and we'll be accepting your surrender in the morning. So Francis Scott Key waited there as they unloaded on Fort McHenry. The men down below were screaming up to their countryman, Francis Scott Key, saying, oh, say, can you see? Hey, can you see that what we saw at the twilight's last gleaming this dawn, is it still standing? Through the rocket's red glare, we saw all night long they were pummeling that fort. And the admiral made a point during the course of the night that the flag was not coming down. And he was getting frustrated. He's like, look, we got to have not only a victory, but a demoralizing victory. We need to take that flagpole down so they're not looking at this stars and stripes that we have up here. And so the admiral said, fix on that flagpole all night long. And so the prisoners down below were saying, we saw last night before it got dark, and we saw through the night with the rockets and the red glare that our flag was still waving. And so what we're asking you now, Francis Scott Key, oh, say, can you see that our flag is still standing and still waving over the home of the free and the brave? And the reason, the answer is yes, is the same reason that you're here today. At Fort McHenry, back then, a lot of people lived in the forts, and they were hitting that flagpole over and over and over again. But the people in that fort were sacrificing their lives and their bodies to hold the flagpole up. In the morning, if you went into Fort McHenry, you would have seen a pile of dead bodies buttressing that flagpole. In the morning, it was leaning, but it was still waving. And that gave Francis Scott Key the inspiration that said that our flag can take that kind of pounding, not because it was a strong pole, but because of the people that were in that fort that were willing to sacrifice their lives just to keep a piece of wood and some threads waving over this country. So next time you're at a baseball game and you're singing the song and they have the words and you see the question mark at the end, remember those guys down below. This song is about you. it's your turn to hold up the flagpole. Now you know what that song's about. Okay, this is when it gets a little bit less serious. Life is short. We've heard that a million times. You usually get speeches about how you're a ship at sea and it's troubled waters and what's your port going to be and how are you going to navigate. I'm not going to talk about that. I'm going to tell you the truth. Life is short. Before you know it, you'll be 25 years from now, you'll be fat, balding, with a bad back, with kids, and you will be, basically, your ambition will be very limited. The reason I say this, and they also people say, get a job where, you love your job so that every day of your life you're not really working. The truth is, for most of us, that doesn't really happen. But what you can do is you can be happy in your life, and you can be happy with your family and your friends. And these are some of the things that I've learned over the years. You're in a very, very small window of time in your lives. As I look out at you, I can see that most of you are young. You've got jobs, some of you, and that's great. Some of you don't. Some of you are going to have opportunities to do something a little bit risky, something that you love to do, but it's a real risk because it takes you away from home and friends and family, and you're not sure if you should do it. In fact, you'll be discouraging from doing risky things or things that you might say, that's my dream job, or I'd love to do it. Why? Because, God bless them, your parents and your family and friends, for the most part, want to protect you. They want you to be safe, and they don't want you to risk what you might call a sure thing. But I'll tell you this, once you have kids and once you get married, there are no more risks. So if you have an opportunity to do something in life that you think is great, take my advice, do it. Try, because the worst thing that can do is you'll fail. But as Theodore Roosevelt once said, I don't pity the people that are in the arena and lose, because at least they're in the arena trying to play the game. Who I pity are the people in the stands who are screaming and yelling at the combatants and making fun of the person that loses. Well, at least the person that loses tried and might not have worked out. But believe me, when you're 80 years old and you're looking in a mirror and you can think to yourself, did I do all the things that I wanted to do? Did I at least try? If you can say to yourself that you at least tried, I think that you'll be happy. Just a couple examples. Myself, I shouldn't be here. I was not a politician. I wasn't in politics. I was 35 years old. My congressman left in disgrace. So there was an opening. I don't know what the feedback is. I apologize. I'll just talk over it. I was going against two sitting politicians, and I had this great idea that if I got a bunch of college kids and convinced their professors to give them college credit during the summer for working on a congressional campaign, that they could get credit for it, and I'd have a bunch of kids working for me. So I had about 20 kids working for me from UF, from FSU, Miami, FAU, everywhere, and now I'm going to have Weber on my next campaign, I hope. But we went door to door. You can't go door to door in a county or in a district as big as this. It's impossible. But I thought that we should at least try, because at least if people have face-to-face contact with somebody else, it'll give me an advantage. On election night, we knocked on over 25,000 doors by that time. We didn't spend the most money. We didn't raise the most money. We weren't as well known. But in the end, I was standing in my office with a bunch of people outside at my victory party, and my brother came in and he said, hey, you're 1,000 points down, and it's 1,000 votes down, and it's almost midnight. You got to say something and let these people go. And I said, just give me a second. And I sat there and I thought, did I do everything that I could do? Did I do everything that everybody told me I'm supposed to do? Because in the end, if I did and I'm still 1,000 votes short, then when my kids grow up, I can say, if you're watching Donald Trump or Bernie Sanders or whoever, and they ask about politics, I can say, you know, I ran for Congress once upon a time. I lost, but I ran. And so can you if you want to. You can do anything you want in this country. This is the only place in the world where literally any one of you sitting out here could be a multimillionaire based on your hard work or your invention or your ingenuity. Nowhere else in the world do you have that opportunity. In none of the other countries in the world do you have that kind of opportunity that you have here. So it really, truly is up to you. Well, what I forgot to mention was Palm Beach County, which was my home county, their absentee ballots, for some reason, weren't counted until the end. And so all the absentee ballots were still yet to be counted, and I am winning by 1,000 votes, and here I am going into my 5th term in Congress. So I also have some friends that went to Hollywood to try to become famous movie stars, which everybody was like, don't do that. It's a waste of time. You're not going to be famous. Who do you think you are, like Robert De Niro or something? Well, 3 of those people you've heard of, I think. And one of them you haven't, but it's a good story too. 2 of them are my first cousins. Katie went out to Hollywood. We were so proud when she got this really small role in Law & Order. Trisha got some like random bit parts in some B-rated movies that were horrible. But they stuck with it, and they stayed out there, and they met the people that they needed to meet. And now Trisha, you might better know as Rooney Mara, who was the girl with the dragon tattoo and most recently nominated for an Oscar in a movie called Carol. And Kate Mara was in Fantastic Four, House of Cards, and most recently The Martian. So they worked, and they stayed out there, and they stuck with it. And you know what? If it didn't work out, they would have just come home, and everybody's like, well, you know, you failed, but you tried. My one friend, and my own friend that I went to grade school with, is a guy named David Boreanaz, who's in this show called Bones, which you guys might not watch because it's a little older, but he did it too. His first movie, he had like literally hands in this horrible ski movie back in the 80s. It was his hands in the movie. And finally, my buddy Pride from high school went out there. He was the guy in the Red Lobster commercial that came out of the ocean with 2 lobster tails. He was the one guy in the Subway commercial who was like, Jared, is that you? And a couple other ones, but it didn't work out. Now he owns a bunch of gas stations in Palm Beach County, but we love making fun of him, and he's the greatest guy in the world. But we all envy him that he tried. And finally, my grandfather, who some of you may know, was a poor Irish Catholic kid from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, who had 8 brothers and sisters. His brother ran part of a club football team in the 20s and 30s in Pittsburgh called the Hope Harvey something or other. And he was running out of money, and he asked my grandfather for help. So my grandfather put in a little bit of money and kept it going. And for 40 years, that club football team was a loser. They never won. They were barely able to make payroll. Until something in 1972 called the Immaculate Reception, when now the Hope Harvey, whatever they were called, Pittsburgh Steelers, Franco Harris changed the destiny of that town and my family. And since then, we've had 6 Super Bowls, more than any other team. He was a loser for 40 years before he stuck with it and turned it around. A couple little tidbits, and I'm going to close. Emails and text. Please, for the love of God, do not fire off an email or a text that you're not sure that you should send and send it until you're absolutely sure. You know, growing up, I only got my first email when I was in law school. Before that, when you wanted to say something to somebody that you didn't want to call on the phone, or you had to send something, you actually had to go to the mailbox and drop it in. And there was always that moment when you open the little blue box and you're like, should I send this? And then you like let it go and you're like freaking out. And then there was like 3 days before they'd even get it. But at least you had time to reflect. Be very careful what you send. And also, don't infer tone in anybody else's email or text to you. Like, hey, great game yesterday. What do you mean? I played my butt off. No, I literally mean great game. My first commander in the Army, a guy named Colonel Lasowski, would not respond to anybody's text messages unless it was a document that he actually had a copy to. If you wanted to talk to Colonel Lasowski, you had to pick up the phone or walk your butt down the hall and talk to him in person. This gets me to my next point. If you're applying for jobs and your employer asks for a resume and a writing sample, and you send it, and you really want that job, and you did not pick up the phone and call that person, you only have yourself to blame. I can tell you as somebody that hires a lot of people, because there's turnover in a congressional office. There's usually young kids that come up, work in Washington, then go get a real job. If a guy or a gal emails or sends in a resume and I look at it, yeah, it looks good, whatever, they all look good, but then I get a note, or then somebody stops by and it's like, hey, that guy, one of the guys that applied for your job answering the phone is here. He wants to talk to you. Or he calls me on the phone and I talk to him. Guess what? They have just moved to the top of the pile. If you think that your stellar resume or your grade point average or your awesome writing sample is going to get you a job that you really want, you're mistaken. Go the extra 5 yards, a football analogy. Call the secretary. I'm dead serious when I say this. Call the person's secretary on the phone. Make friends with that person. Say, hey, I'm Tom Rooney. I'm applying for the job. How you doing? How's your day been going? I'm not being phony. I'm being serious. Look, I really want this job. Can you give me any advice at all on how your boss would look more or less favorably on my application? If she feels your sincerity, or he feels your sincerity, guess what? You just got the boss's secretary on your side. Guess who's sitting in the room with the boss when he's going through the resumes? The secretary. So when he's going through and she says, hey, by the way, that Tom Rooney guy, he seems really good. I really like that guy. It's going to make an impression. Relationships and personal touch matter. Don't just rely on emails. Don't rely on not talking to people. I know this generation is mostly focused on doing that, but it moves you way up if you can break out of that. The same with social media, Facebook, and whatever. Things are going to come back to bite you in the rear end if you're not careful what you do. Just look at last night's NFL draft. One of the first-round draft picks, a Twitter picture came out of him smoking weed when he was in high school. He went from the first overall draft pick to dropping down to the 13th, costing him millions of dollars. Why? Because he let somebody take a picture of him in high school smoking pot because he thought it was funny. And now he's a man trying to get a job, and he just blew millions of dollars. If you think it's funny to put stuff out there on Facebook or Twitter or whatever because your friends think it's funny and you think it's not going to cost you, I have people in my office that go on your Facebook page. If you're applying for a job from me, go on their Facebook page, see what they're all about. If there's a picture of you smoking weed on your Facebook page, you're not getting hired by my office. You're not getting hired by any of these other people that employ people in this room either. Don't let people put stuff, and don't put stuff of yourself on your social media that's going to hurt you down the road. I'm just going to close with this. If you're driving too slow, get to the right. Number 2. Number 2, you may not get rich, but one of the keys to true happiness, whether it be for marriage or whatever, is keeping your debt down. You might not be rich, but if you have little debt, believe me, all of the fights that I have with my wife begin and end and revolve around money and the consequences thereof. We work very hard to get our debt down, and life is a lot better. You might not be rich, but at least you don't have the kind of debt that you should. Here's a little tip. If you don't think you can afford the car, you can't afford the car. 2 + 2 does not equal 3 ever. It's still going to be 4. And finally, and I touched on this before, there was a movie when I was in high school called Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. Does anybody remember this movie? The final theme of this great movie was to be excellent to one another. For real. Life is too short to be mean, to cast people off, to dismiss people because they're a little bit different, or they might be, not as cool as you or whatever. You never know when people are going to come back around. And it's a lot more of a great life, and you'll be happy, truly happy, if you're good to each other. And God bless. Have fun, and go Warriors.